Wessex was an Anglo-Saxon kingdom in the south of Great Britain, from 519 until England was unified by Æthelstan in the early 10th century. The Anglo-Saxons believed that Wessex was founded by Cerdic and Cynric, but this may be a legend. The two main sources for the history of Wessex are the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the West Saxon genealogical Regnal list, which sometimes conflict. Wessex became a Christian kingdom after Cenwalh was baptised and was expanded under his rule. Cadwalla later conquered Sussex, Kent and the Isle of Wight. His successor Ine issued one of the oldest surviving English law codes and established a second West Saxon bishopric. The throne subsequently passed to a series of kings with unknown genealogies. During the 8th century, as the hegemony of Mercia grew, Wessex largely retained its independence. It was during this period that the system of shires was established. Under Egbert, Surrey, Sussex, Kent, Essex, and Mercia, along with parts of Dumnonia, were conquered. He also obtained the overlordship of the Northumbrian king. However, Mercian independence was restored in 830. During the reign of his successor, Æthelwulf, a Danish army arrived in the Thames estuary, but was decisively defeated. When Æthelwulf's son, Æthelbald, usurped the throne, the kingdom was divided to avoid war. Æthelwulf was succeeded in turn by his 4 sons, the youngest being Alfred the Great. Wessex was invaded by the Danes in 871, and Alfred was compelled to pay them to leave. They returned in 876, but were forced to withdraw. In 878 they forced Alfred to flee to the Somerset Levels, but were eventually defeated at the Battle of Edington. During his reign Alfred issued a new law code, gathered scholars to his court and was able to devote funds to building ships, organizing an army and establishing a system of burghs. Alfred's son, Edward, captured the Eastern Midlands and East Anglia from the Danes and became ruler of Mercia in 918 upon the death of his sister, Æthelfled. Edward's son, Æthelstan, conquered Northumbria in 927, and England became a unified kingdom for the first time. Cnut the Great, who conquered England in 1016, created the wealthy and powerful earldom of Wessex. But in 1066 Harold Godwinson reunited the earldom with the crown and Wessex ceased to exist. Background: modern archaeologists use the term Wessex culture for a Middle Bronze Age culture in this area. A millennium before that, in the late Neolithic, the ceremonial sites of Avebury and Stonehenge were completed on Salisbury Plain, but the final phase of Stonehenge was erected in the Wessex culture era phase, early in the Bronze Age. This area has many other earthworks and erected stone monuments from the Neolithic and early Bronze periods, including the Dorset Cursus, an earthwork 10 kilometers long and 100 meters wide, which was oriented to the midwinter sunset. Although agriculture and hunting were pursued during this long period, there is little archaeological evidence of human settlements. For the Neolithic onwards, the chalk downland of Wessex was traversed by the Harrow Way, which can still be traced from Marazion in Cornwall to the coast of the English Channel near Dover, and was probably connected with the ancient tin trade. During the Roman occupation, numerous country villas with attached farms were established across Wessex, along with the important towns of Dorchester and Winchester. The Romans, or rather the Romano-British, built another major road that integrated Wessex, running eastwards from Exeter through Dorchester to Winchester and Silchester and on to London. The early 4th century CE was a peaceful time in Roman Britain. However, following a previous incursion in 360 that was stopped by Roman forces, the Picts and Scots attacked Hadrian's Wall in the far north in 367 and defeated the soldiers stationed along it. They devastated many parts of Britain and laid siege to London. Britain. The Romans responded promptly, and Count Theodosius had recovered the land up to the wall by 368. The Romans temporarily ceased to rule Britain on the death of Magnus Maximus in 388. Stilicho attempted to restore Roman authority in the late 390s, but in 401 he took Roman troops from Britain to fight the Goths. Two subsequent Roman rulers of Britain, appointed by the remaining troops, were murdered. Constantine III became ruler, but he then left for Gaul and withdrew more troops. The Britons then requested assistance from Honorius, but when he replied in 410 he told them to manage their own defences. By this point, there were no longer any Roman troops in Britain. Economical decline occurred after these events. Circulation of Roman coins ended and the importation of items from the Roman Empire stopped. In an introduction to Anglo-Saxon England, Peter Hunter Blair divides the traditions concerning the Anglo-Saxon settlement of Britain into two categories: Welsh and English. The De Rexidio Conquestu Britanniae, written by Gildas, contains the best preservation of the Welsh tradition. In brief, it states that after the Romans left, the Britons managed to continue for a time without any major disruptions. However, when finally faced with northern invaders, a certain unnamed ruler in Britain requested assistance from the Saxons in exchange for land. There were no conflicts between the British and the Saxons for a time, but following a dispute about the supply of provisions, the Saxons warred against the British and severely damaged parts of the country. In time, however, some Saxon troops left Britain under Ambrosius Aurelianus. The British subsequently defeated those who remained. A lengthy conflict ensued, in which neither side gained any decisive advantage until the Britons routed the Saxons at the Battle of Mons Badonicus. After this, there occurred a peaceful period for the Britons, under which Gildas was living at the time he wrote the De Rexidio Conquestu Britanniae. One of the English traditions about the Saxon arrival is that of Hengist and Horsa. When Bede wrote his ecclesiastical history of the English people, he adapted Gildas' narrative and added details, such as the names of those involved. To the proud tyrant he gave the name Vortigern, and the Saxon commanders he named Hengist and Horsa. Further details were added to the story in the Historia Brittonum, which was partially written by Nennius. According to the Historia, Hengist and Horsa fought the invaders of Britain under the condition of gaining the island of Thanet. The daughter of Hengist, Rowena, later arrived on a ship of reinforcements, and Vortigern married her. However, a war arose in Kent due to a dispute between Hengist and Vortigern's son. After losing several battles, the Saxons finally defeated the British by treacherously attacking them once the two parties had convened for a meeting. Some additional details of the Hengist and Horsa legend are found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The Chronicle then records subsequent Saxon arrivals, including that of Cerdic, the founder of Wessex, in 495. Saxon settlement. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the primary written source for the founding of Wessex, states that Cerdic and Cynric landed in Britain with 5 ships in 495. Although the entry mentions Cynric as Cerdic's son, a different source lists him as the son of Cerdic's son, Creoda. The place of landing is believed to be the southern Hampshire coast. The Chronicle continues, stating that Port and his 2 sons Beada and Maegla landed at Portsmouth in 501 and killed a high-ranking British nobleman. In 508, Cerdic and Cynric slew a British king named Natlad and 5,000 men with him. Cerdic became the first king of Wessex in 519. The Saxons attacked Cerdic in 519, intending to cross the River Avon and block a road which connected Old Sarum and Badbury Rings, a British stronghold. The battle appears to have ended as a draw, and the expansion of Wessex ended for about 30 years. This is likely due to losses suffered during the battle and an apparent peace agreement with the Britons. The Battle of Mons Badonicus is believed to have been fought around this time. Gildner states that the Saxons were completely defeated in the battle, in which King Arthur participated according to Nennius. This defeat is not recorded in the Chronicle. The 30-year period of peace was temporarily interrupted when, according to the Chronicle, the Saxons conquered the Isle of Wight in 530 at a battle near Carisbrooke. Cynric became the ruler of Wessex after Cerdic died in 534, and reigned for 26 years. It is presumed that Cenwalh, who succeeded Cynric in about 581, was his son. Cenwalh's reign is thought to be more reliably documented than those of his predecessors, though the Chronicle's dates of 560 to 592 are different from the revised chronology. Cenwalh overcame pockets of resisting Britons to the northeast, in the Chilterns, Gloucestershire and Somerset. The capture of Cirencester, Gloucester and Bath in 577, after the pause caused by the Battle of Mons Badonicus, opened the way to the southwest. Cenwalh is one of the 7 kings named in Bede's ecclesiastical history of the English people as holding imperium over the southern English. The Chronicle later repeated this claim, referring to Cenwalh as a Bretwalder, or Breton ruler. Cenwalh was deposed, perhaps by his successor, a nephew named Ceol, and died a year later. 6 years later, in about 594, Ceol was succeeded by a brother, Cenwalh, who was succeeded in his turn in about 617 by Cynegils. The genealogies do not agree on Cynegils' pedigree. His father is variously given as Ceola, Cenwalh, Ceol, Cuthwine, Cuther, Cuthwulf, Christian Wessex and the rise of Mercia. It is in Cynegils' reign that the first event in West Saxon history that can be dated with reasonable certainty occurs: the baptism of Cynegils by Birinus, which happened at the end of the 630s, perhaps in 640. Birinus was then established as Bishop of the West Saxons, with his seat at Dorchester-on-Thames. This was the first conversion to Christianity by a West Saxon king, but it was not accompanied by the immediate conversion of all the West Saxons. Cynegils' successor, Cenwalh, who came to the throne in about 642, was a pagan at his accession. However, he too was baptized only a few years later, and Wessex became firmly established as a Christian kingdom. Cynegils' godfather was King Oswald of Northumbria, and his conversion may have been connected with an alliance against King Penda of Mercia, who had previously attacked Wessex. These attacks marked the beginning of sustained pressure from the expanding kingdom of Mercia. In time this would deprive Wessex of its territories north of the Thames and the Avon, encouraging the kingdom's reorientation southwards. Cenwalh married Penda's daughter, and when he repudiated her, Penda again invaded and drove him into exile for some time, perhaps 3 years. The dates are uncertain, but it was probably in the late 640s or early 650s. He spent his exile in East Anglia and was converted to Christianity there. After his return, Cenwalh faced further attacks from Penda's successor Wulfhere, but was able to expand West Saxon territory in Somerset at the expense of the Britons. He established a second bishopric at Winchester, while the one at Dorchester was soon abandoned as Mercian power pushed southwards. Winchester would eventually eventually develop into the effective capital of Wessex. After Cenwalh's death in 673, his widow, Siexbert, held the throne for a year. She was followed by Æthelstan, who was apparently descended from another brother of Cenwalh. This was one of several occasions on which the kingship of Wessex is said to have passed to a remote branch of the royal family with an unbroken male line of descent from Cerdic. These claims may be genuine, or may reflect the spurious assertion of descent from Cerdic to legitimize a new dynasty. Æthelstan's reign only lasted 2 years, and in 676 the throne passed back to the immediate family of Cenwalh with the accession of his brother Cenwalh. Cenwalh is known to have fought and won battles against the Britons, but the details have not survived. Cenwalh was succeeded by another supposed distant relative, Cadwalla, who claimed descent from Cenwalh. Cadwalla reigned for just 2 years, but achieved a dramatic expansion of the kingdom's power, conquering the kingdoms of Sussex, Kent and the Isle of Wight, although Kent regained its independence almost immediately and Sussex followed some years later. His reign ended in 688 when he abdicated and went on pilgrimage to Rome, where he was baptized by Pope Sergius I and died soon afterwards. His successor was Ein, who also claimed to be a descendant of Cerdic through Cenwalh, but again through a long separated line of descent. Ein was the most durable of the West Saxon kings, reigning for 38 years. He issued the oldest surviving English code of laws apart from those of the Kingdom of Kent, and established a second West Saxon bishopric at Sherborne, covering the territories west of Selwood Forest. Near the end of his life he followed in Cadwalla's footsteps by abdicating and making a pilgrimage to Rome. The throne then passed to a series of other kings who claimed descent from Cerdic but whose supposed genealogies and relationship to one another are unknown. During the 8th century, Wessex was overshadowed by Mercia, whose power was then at its height, and the West Saxon kings may at times have acknowledged Mercian overlordship. They were, however, able to avoid the more substantial control which Mercia exerted over smaller kingdoms. During this period, Wessex continued its gradual advance to the west, overwhelming the British kingdom of Dumnonia. At this time, Wessex took de facto control over much of Devon, although Britons retained a degree of independence in Devon until at least the 10th century. As a result of the Mercian conquest of the northern portion of its early territories in Gloucestershire and Oxfordshire, the Thames and the Avon now probably formed the northern boundary of Wessex, while its heartland lay in Hampshire, Wiltshire, Berkshire, Dorset and Somerset. The system of shires, which was later to form the basis of local administration throughout England, originated in Wessex, and had been established by the mid-8th century. The hegemony of Wessex and the Viking raids. In 802 the fortunes of Wessex were transformed by the accession of Egbert, who came from a cadet branch of the ruling dynasty that claimed descent from In's brother Ingild. With his accession the throne became firmly established in the hands of a single lineage. Early in his reign he conducted 2 campaigns against the West Welsh, first in 813 and then again at Gaffelford in 825. During the course of these campaigns he conquered the western Britons still in Devon and reduced those beyond the River Tamar, now Cornwall, to the status of a vassal. In 825 or 826 he overturned the political order of England by decisively defeating King Beornwulf of Mercia at Ellendon and seizing control of Surrey, Sussex, Kent and Essex from the Mercians, while with his help East Anglia broke away from Mercian control. In 829 he conquered Mercia, driving its king Wiglaf into exile, and secured acknowledgement of his overlordship from the king of Northumbria. He thereby became the Bretwalda, or High King of Britain. This position of dominance was short-lived, as Wiglaf returned and restored Mercian independence in 830, but the expansion of Wessex across southeastern England proved permanent. Egbert's later years saw the beginning of Danish Viking raids on Wessex, which occurred frequently from 835 onwards. In 851 a huge Danish army, said to have been carried on 350 ships, arrived in the Thames estuary. Having defeated King Beowulf of Mercia in battle, the Danes moved on to invade Wessex, but were decisively crushed by Egbert's son and successor King Æthelwulf in the exceptionally bloody Battle of Aclea. This victory postponed Danish conquests in England for 15 years, but raids on Wessex continued. In 855–6 Æthelwulf went on pilgrimage to Rome, and his eldest surviving son Æthelbald took advantage of his absence to seize his father's throne. On his return, Æthelwulf agreed to divide the kingdom with his son to avoid bloodshed, ruling the new territories in the east while Æthelbald held the old heartland in the west. Æthelwulf was succeeded by each of his 4 surviving sons, ruling one after another. The rebellious Æthelbald, then Ethelbert, who had previously inherited the eastern territories from his father and who reunited the kingdom on Æthelbald's death, then Ethel, and finally Alfred the Great. This occurred because the first 2 brothers died in wars with the Danes without issue, while Ethelred's sons were too young to rule when the father died. The last English kingdom. In 865, several of the Danish commanders combined their respective forces into one large army and landed in England. Over the following years, what became known as the Great Heathen Army overwhelmed the kingdoms of Northumbria and East Anglia. Then in 871, the Great Summer Army arrived from Scandinavia to reinforce the Great Heathen Army. The reinforced army invaded Wessex, and although Ethel and Alfred won some victories and succeeded in preventing the conquest of the kingdom, a number of defeats and heavy losses of men compelled Alfred to pay the Danes to leave Wessex. The Danes spent the next few years subduing Mercia, and some of them settled in Northumbria, but the rest returned to Wessex in 876. Alfred responded effectively and was able with little fighting to bring about the withdrawal in 877. A portion of the Danish army settled in Mercia, but at the beginning of 878 the remaining Danes mounted a winter invasion of Wessex, taking Alfred by surprise and overrunning much of the kingdom. Alfred was reduced to taking refuge with a small band of followers in the marshes of the Somerset levels, but after a few months he was able to gather an army and defeated the Danes at the Battle of Edington, bringing about the final withdrawal from Wessex to settle in East Anglia. Simultaneous Danish raids on the north coast of France and Brittany occurred in the 870s, prior to the establishment of Normandy in 911, and recorded Danish alliances with both Bretons and Cornish may have resulted in the suppression of Cornish autonomy with the death by drowning of King Donyath in 875 as recorded by the Annales Cambriae. No subsequent kings of Cornwall are recorded after this time. However, Asser records Cornwall as a separate kingdom from Wessex in the 890s. In 879 a Viking fleet that had assembled in the Thames estuary sailed across the Channel to start a new campaign on the continent. The rampaging Viking army on the continent encouraged Alfred to protect his kingdom of Wessex. Over the following years, Alfred Alfred carried out a dramatic reorganization of the government and defences of Wessex, building more ships, organizing the army into two shifts which served alternately, and establishing a system of fortified burghs across the kingdom. This system is recorded in a 10th century document known as the Burgel Heidage, which details the location and garrisoning requirements of 33 forts, whose positioning ensured that no one in Wessex was more than a long day's ride from a place of safety. In the 890s, these reforms helped him to repulse the invasion of another huge Danish army, which was aided by the Danes settled in England with minimal losses. Alfred also reformed the administration of justice, issued a new law code, and championed a revival of scholarship and education. He gathered scholars from around England and elsewhere in Europe to his court, and with the help translated a range of Latin texts into English, doing much of the work in person, and orchestrated the composition of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. As a result of these literary efforts and the political dominance of Wessex, the West Saxon dialect of this period became the standard written form of Old English for the rest of the Anglo-Saxon period and beyond. The Danish conquests had destroyed the kingdoms of Northumbria and East Anglia and divided Mercia in half, with the Danes settling in the northeast while the southwest was left to the English king Cenwalh, allegedly a Danish puppet. When Cenwalh's rule came to an end, he was succeeded as ruler of English Mercia not by another king but by a mere ealdorman named Æthel, who acknowledged Alfred's overlordship and married his daughter Æthelstan. The process by which this transformation of the status of Mercia took place is unknown, but it left Alfred as the only remaining English king. The unification of England and the earldom of Wessex. After the invasions of the 890s, Wessex and English Mercia continued to be attacked by the Danish settlers in England, and by small Danish raiding forces from overseas, but these incursions were usually defeated, while there were no further major invasions from the continent. The balance of power tipped steadily in favour of the English. In 911 the ealdorman Æthel died, leaving his widow, Alfred's daughter Æthelflæd, in charge of Mercia. Alfred's son and successor Edward the Elder then annexed London, Oxford and the surrounding area, probably including Middlesex, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, from Mercia to Wessex. Between 913 and 918 a series of English offensives overwhelmed the Danes of Mercia and East Anglia, bringing all of England south of the Humber under Edward's power. In 918 Æthelflæd died and Edward took over direct control of Mercia, extinguishing what remained of its independence and ensuring that henceforth there would be only one kingdom of the English. In 927 Edward's successor Æthelstan conquered Northumbria, bringing the whole of England under one ruler for the first time. The kingdom of Wessex had thus been transformed into the kingdom of England, although Wessex had now effectively been subsumed into the larger kingdom which its expansion had created. Like the other former kingdoms, it continued for a time to have a distinct identity which periodically found renewed political expression. After the death of King Edward in 955, England was divided between his two sons, with the elder Edwy ruling in Wessex while Mercia passed to his younger brother Edgar. However, in 959, Edwy died and the whole of England came under Edgar's control. After the conquest of England by the Danish king Cenwalh in 1016, he established earldoms based on the former kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia and East Anglia, but initially administered Wessex personally. Within a few years, however, he had created an earldom of Wessex, encompassing all of England south of the Thames, for his English henchman Godwin. For almost 50 years the vastly wealthy holders of this earldom, first Godwin and then his son Harold, were the most powerful men in English politics after the king. Finally, on the death of Edward the Confessor in 1066, Harold became king, reuniting the earldom of Wessex with the crown. No new earl was appointed before the ensuing Norman conquest of England, and as the Norman kings soon did away with the great earldoms of the late Anglo-Saxon period, 1066 marks the extinction of Wessex as a political unit.